powered by Reviting, streaming from the Reviting Digital Studio. It's the David Daily. Exploring frontier technology, artificial intelligence, quantum innovation, and the intersection of faith, funding, and the future. Here's your host, David Goki.
Welcome to another episode of the David Daily Show. Today we have a special segment called Funding, Faith, and Future Tech. And I am excited to invite you to watch this show every week where we bring special guests, thought leaders, angel investors, and venture capital funds, and sometimes even founders themselves to speak to you and to speak on these special topics of funding in this day and age, faith, background, and the future of technology. So today, without further ado, I'm going to welcome our guest, Kasey Devine, to the stage. Kasey, it's so good to have you here today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Great to be on the show.
Awesome. So just for those tuning in for the first time, or maybe they've tuned in before, and maybe they haven't seen you on LinkedIn, can you tell us just a little bit more about yourself and why you're so passionate about LinkedIn as a platform?
Yeah, I've been on it for a little while. I'm the founder and CEO of an HR tech company called Intravia. We just recently raised a pre-seed that we announced in the beginning of the year. And as far as it goes to LinkedIn, I've basically driven my entire professional network there, going back all the way to 2015, and have really been grinding there on the platform for a long time. I think it's a really great way if you think of going to a networking event that is never off. It's a really great way to make sure that you're communicating what you're all about and being able to connect with what I'd say is the new version of community that isn't just the neighbors next door, but folks that are like-minded across the country and across the world.
I like that like-mindedness. It's the idea that we have similar values and belief systems and maybe cultural backgrounds, and we can actually come together. So who are typically the types of people that you serve in your business? And by the way, congratulations on getting funded. What details of funding can you share as we lean into our funding concepts?
Yeah, so maybe I'll start on the funding side. One thing from the founder's perspective is, you hang your entire career on doing something because you believe it's going to make a difference, it's going to make an impact, it's going to help people. And you believe in it, you see the vision. When it comes to funding, it's always going to take longer than you think, even when the traction's there, even when you have a great idea. That's the first thing. And the second thing is to just kind of detach the funding side from the business. Regardless of funding, you need to execute in the business if you believe in it. And there are enough angel investors, funders out there that if you really do have something and it's special, when you are authentically yourself as a founder or a co-founder, and you have that with a really great business, or at least concept early stages, like you will find the investors that you were meant to find. I believe, because it happened to us.
Yeah, I love that. Awesome. So we're going to jump right in. So the format of this show, by the way, if you're tuning in, please post in the comments. We'd love to engage with you. And that's one of the benefits of going live. We have over 40 people live now across all platforms. Love it. So let's tap into our first topic, which is from a funding point of view.
Time to talk about funding.
All right, awesome. So our first topic is deal flow and funding. So values alignment is super important. I definitely appreciate that perspective. So tell us, how did you get your values aligned, or how did you even start to align your values with your investors?
I think first things, I'm really clear on what my values are, and by no means am like me communicating it, meaning that you have to specifically share them. But I'm a adult Catholic convert, and so I brought that into the even reason I founded Intravia, to really promote the dignity of work, especially within small businesses. And since that was so central to the work that we are doing, and the whole reason why Intravia was even founded, it bleeds into every single conversation, because that is the core ethos of what we're doing. And so then naturally, instead of it being like, I need to figure out how to nest funding and your value system, it was the other way around. And so we actually were serendipitously, although I don't believe in that, funded by M25 here in the Midwest. They're out of Chicago. M25 actually stands for Matthew 25, the parable of the talents, which is really aligning with even the mission of Intravia. And so I think starting from the beginning with values in mind and being clearly communicating on what we are and what we aren't is a little bit scary, because it does put you, on a path. But as long as that's the path that you want to be on, I think it's great. And so far, it's really great to work with and collaborate with a firm that sees eye to eye with our value system as well.
Yeah, value alignment, especially Midwest. So I have roots in the Midwest as well, family in both Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, Iowa, and other cities across the Midwest. So I love the Midwest values. Tell me a little bit more about how you were able to strategically position yourself as a startup founder in the Midwest, not being on a coast.
Yeah, I think there's arguments to be made for both sides. I don't think that Midwest founders are better than coastal founders. And then the more controversial thing to say is I don't think coastal founders are better than Midwest founders. But I think what you find, especially in the Midwest, is that you find a work ethic. You also find a sense of community. And we, I think, are more likely to be bootstrapping. We understand, I think, how to make a dollar go farther, and I think that can be to our benefit and also to our detriment. Where I think on the coast you're just exposed more to grow at all costs, or up into the right really quickly. It isn't necessarily that we're thinking not about that, but we are definitely thinking about being good stewards of whatever resource we have more often than not, especially capital, especially employment. And I think that really plays well into a competitive strength, because early on, especially, that was necessary, especially before we got funded. In the time I was bootstrapping this organization, what you're doing is you're trying to make the dollars go really far, but you're also trying to find people who are in this with your mission, who aren't necessarily doing this because of the money that's there today. It's totally fine that they were doing it for the money that might be there tomorrow, but they came on board because of that alignment, and that, I think, was what unlocked the growth that we've seen so far.
Yeah, I love that. The idea of capital efficiency is a common topic during our funding segment, because now more than ever, investors specifically are looking for capital efficiency, meaning how much further can their capital actually go, right? And in addition to that, in an early stage aspect, when they could be betting on anything in the repertoire of so many startups needing funding today, what was it for you that said, look, we can be more capital efficient here in Minnesota. We can be more capital efficient at an early stage. And not only that, we have real traction and results.
Yeah, I think part of this is just going back into my background as a founder. And so I'm one of the LinkedIn trends as far as founder goes, which is like a founder that's been in an industry for a long time, that's kind of a nerd within that space. I'm in the HR tech, employee benefits, and HR outsourcing space overall. And from there, I think one of the nuances to our business is we didn't build it and hope they would come. This comes from a decades plus worth of experience of me experiencing the problem and seeing others that experience the problem. And so we started with the go-to-market motion in mind, instead of building this really pretty thing in a basement or in a boardroom and then popping out and hoping that people see it. Like we were definitely started from, how are we going to get distribution, especially in today's day and age where distribution is the moat. That's where we started, and I think that also aligned to de-risk the deal for our funders, because we're thinking about that. Not that we're not thinking about products, but we're thinking about how can this get distributed. But again, going back to the value side, it's because if we don't distribute it, we're not helping anybody, we're not making an impact. And so that is what's top of mind. We can have this beautiful thing, but if no one sees it and it doesn't help anyone, it's really a moot point.
Distribution is the moat. I love that quote for so many reasons. First of all, is someone at Reveting paying you to say that? Because Reveting is all about distribution.
Hey, if they would, they're not yet, but if they want to, I'll share my Venmo after this.
Nice. I love it. Okay. So GTM, let's talk GTM as a founder, as an investor. Let's put our investor hat on. That's what the founding the funding piece is all about the funding topic, right? Is so you're a funder, you're a founder, and you want capital efficiency, right? You want that GTM to already be in place when you're putting your money down. It's like the horse is already running. I'm betting on a running horse who's going to be winning. So how do you show that distribution is the mode for an investor?
So when you think about GTM, you have to think about who, like, if your solution, your product, your service, whatever, is a solution to a problem, who has that problem? When do they have it? And so then from a GTM perspective, if you have to be crystal clear on those two things, and then you have to be thinking about how do I get my message of for me, Intravia can help that specific thing to that specific person at that specific time. And I think you really need to dial in on people. When we think about, oh, there's X hundreds of thousands of small businesses or startups or nonprofits or Fortune 500s, yes, but we don't really sell to businesses. I don't think that's actually how it works. Like, people interact with people, and we might be wearing a logo on our shirt, but saying that this isn't true, I'm gonna sell to Microsoft, for example. It's like, well, yeah, in all reality, there's a handful of people that you're actually going to be influencing and trying to partner with and make their lives better. A handful of people that are going to be saying yes or no to your deal. So if you're coming through that and you're really crystal clear on who those people are, you're really crystal clear on what their problems are and how you solve it, and how to get that message to them when they're experiencing the problem. I think that's where the go-to-market perspective comes in. And that's going to be a business to business. For us, it's like, hey, we know that folks are dealing with this around benefits renewals or when they have HR trigger events like hiring or firing, unfortunately. And so that's where we are really honed in on what's in it for them. Like, how do we help you? Not how cool our technology is, but how do we help you with this thing? And that we show that we understand and we've sat in their seat and we understand what they're going through, positively, negatively, etc., and that we have a way to make it even better.
I love that, especially this aspect of team in the age of technology and automation. And without getting too specific on tech, because that will be in our tech section and tech topics. So I'm an investor. I'm thinking about, okay, 1 in 10, maybe 1 in 20 are actually going to make my money back, right? So as an investor, as an angel, I'm thinking, okay, how do I protect my money? And it's not just good products, right? It's having good people, it's having good technology, it's having revenue coming in the doors through the go to market motion. And I love that Kasey is saying that distribution is the moat. So from a funding perspective, early stage, at what point should a founder, start to talk to investors? As an investor who's looking at pre-seed startups, when would an investor say, oh yeah, you know what, this is when they need an influx of capital? Yeah, what does that look like as an investor?
I think the time to start those conversations is even potentially before you start something. It's definitely not when you're like 30 days out from needing something. Think about it, this isn't exactly the case, but if you go to any sort of startup or funding based networking event, somebody's going to say the quip that the average pre-seed investment lasts longer than the average marriage in the United States. And so I think it's appropriate to approach it semi like a marriage, to understand that you're probably not going to go find a significant other or spouse 30 days before you want the wedding date. This is a long-term relationship. It's something to develop, again, because the funder is taking a bet on the founder and the team, and the founder is also taking a bet on the funder that's going to be an aligned relationship that they can count on well into the future, especially once this gets big. And so I personally, before I even decided to start something, I've been in the venture capital angel investing early stage ecosystem, definitely in the Twin Cities here in Minnesota, but more regionally, and then on LinkedIn for years. It's been where I've been hanging out. That might have influenced me to become a founder in the first place, but that's also, I think, what helped me to get that ball rolling with fundraising and really do it quickly, is because A, I knew who the players were that were going to be relevant. B, I knew what they cared about. And C, even if I wasn't connected to the specific person that we ended up doing business with, there were mutual connections that could vouch for me as a person, me as a professional. And that really helped, I think, accelerate things, because I wasn't a stranger off the street.
Right. Yeah, no, I love that analogy to a marriage, and whether it's like a domestic partnership. I think in Canada, actually, if it's 6 months, you're considered a domestic partner if you have the same domicile. And in the United States, obviously, you need a marital license and that sort of a thing. I'm curious, do you have experience being married? Are you married currently? Why the reference to marriage? I'm just curious.
I am married. We have 2 kids. One's a 11-week-old baby screaming upstairs.
Oh, wow.
Um,
Congratulations.
yeah, thank you. But it's been something that I don't know why, but every time I've gone to like a funders and founders event or a roundtable talking about pre-seed investing, somebody says that quote. And I think it's specifically to hit on the fact that, if the average marriage, at least in the United States, lasts 5 years, the average investment from pre-seed to exit is 10. And so these are people, again, not just firms, not just businesses, but actually people that are going to be interacting and really having like an outsized impact on your month to month life, and also the decisions that you're going to make and the connections you make. So it's really important to align with them and to get to know them ahead of that, not just to accept a check, because I think even from a founder perspective, it is really tempting to take whatever money you can when you're just trying to prove it out. And at the same time, having that alignment and having those relationships early on is crucial, because if you really are right, those are going to be people that early stage, those funders are going to be more closely aligned to you than any other check that's written into your business. So it's really important that you like talking to them and vice versa.
Yeah, I hope you like talking to your marital partner. If not, you won't last the average. Which I was going to ask you, how long is the average marriage? And if it's 5 years in the States, I definitely can understand that. So
I think it is.
basically, you're saying like, okay, look, most likely this is going to be a 10-year deal. And when you're talking to a startup as an investor, a venture capital fund manager, a family office representative, maybe even a family friend of a wealthy family looking for startups, it is a 10-year process, and you might not get your money back even in those 10 years. So I like that you're kind of alluding to it being a long-term marriage. So now the question is, how do you start to ask those questions to those founders? How long do you need as an investor to really get to know your founders before you say, you know what, this is something I want to invest in? It's kind of like when you go to ask your partner's father for their hand in marriage as a traditionalist, right? You don't go meet him on the first day. No, there's time that's involved. So, what does that journey look like as an investor reaching out to founders who need funding and are pursuing you, dating you, courting you, and wanting to get funding for their startups?
Yeah, we'll keep pulling the thread, I think, on this analogy because it helps, at least in a lot
Yeah.
of cases. So if you're the funder, you need to understand that the founder doesn't have their act together entirely, just like that brand new potential partner spouse might not have their act together entirely up front. And you need to be able to see and check on their dependability. You need to be able to check on their vision of where they're going, and also understanding that like you're really just filtering for how they think and their value system and the general path that they're on. The likelihood of a pre-seed or pre-seed, even an angel check founder doing the exact same thing they pitched you on in the exact same way in even a year is like not much. There are pivots that happen because you're forcing your idea against reality of the market timing and conditions, and because of that, things are going to change. And so I think that the reach out is,
Mhm.
yeah, you can go like find them. There are sites that can connect them. I'm actually friends with a founder of a social media platform that connects founders and funders, and it's called Investling Social. It's a great place to hang out for either side of that marketplace. But really, I think the best way to do that is to go into your local ecosystem and find the networking events, find the co-working spaces. If there aren't those, find the coffee shops, hang out, get to know folks, go to where they are. If you're a funder looking to deploy the capital, I think that's the best way to start creating some of those authentic relationships.
Yeah, it's like, could you do this? It's like the amount of due diligence that's required for a startup. It's like, can you also do this in marriage too, right? It's like, all right, so for those of you watching this far in, you may know that I've been previously married and unfortunately also divorced. But what maybe I would have done going back, hindsight being 2020, is maybe I would have done more due diligence, right? Getting a full medical history, maybe getting a full, background check, maybe getting a full financial insight, maybe investing more time to get to know the family history and the culture and those sorts of things. And there comes a point where you just make a gut instinct, right? You pray on it, you think about it, you take all of the data that you have in front of you, and you make as informed of a decision as you can. And so similarly, as a funder, right, as you're getting to know a startup team member, is this someone who has been through a storm, right? Is this a team that has had conflict, has had to weather difficult times? And in the past 5 years, there definitely have been difficult times that funders and founders have had to weather. So if you're looking for funding, not only are capital markets tighter today, but there will be more scrutiny on that early stage courting and networking period as you're looking for funding. So maybe we'll lean into our second topic, which is in our faith category.
Focusing on faith for a moment.
Kasey, if you're tuning into the show, thank you for being here. Faith and leadership in tech. So let's just start with faith. What does faith actually mean to you? And the second question is, what context does early childhood religion play into your faith view today?
Ooh, great question. I'll go in reverse. I was really raised without much faith. I was somewhere between agnostic and atheist growing up, although I was around a lot of Christians, Catholics, and then raised like culturally Jewish from my mother's side. I decided to become a Catholic convert by my own free will 4 years ago now. And so it's funny because the childhood really had no impact on where I am today. But I think what you were saying in the last segment really ties into that decision for me and still into the business, which is the what does faith mean? It is that there's something more important than me, and also how I relate to the world and how I relate to other people. I mean, I can get a lot more theological than that, but to speak a little bit more broadly, that's really what that means. And it's trying to figure out how that all works and whether there is a definitive morality that guides how we act, and how, especially in all life's walks, but business for sure. If I don't have the end goal in mind, to quote Toby Keith, if you don't know where you're going, you might end up somewhere else. And I think that kind of puts a bow on the idea for that.
Yeah, no, I love it. And I want you to get deep into the theology. In fact, I like theology for a couple of reasons. One, faith mentor of mine once said, David, look, you can debate theology all day long. Happy to do it. You can't debate relationship with the divine. Your last name is Devine, spelled slightly differently. And I'm curious, how do you then apply those faith values now in the Catholic faith into your leadership in tech?
Yeah, I think there's two different points that really matter from my background as a Catholic leading a tech company. The first is servant leadership. I think that that was a really radical concept when Christ proclaimed that, and it's something that we take for granted, at least in the West, of servant leadership. We see a lot of books about that, but washing your followers' feet, for lack of a better term, is something that was not done. And I think that's the first thing, is how I exist as the founder and CEO of this company to serve others, especially the folks that said yes to working toward that mission with me, the employees. From the other side is there's a dignity of the human person that really matters. And I think that as founder and CEO, that's how we treat the people who work here. That's how we treat our customers, our partners, et cetera. But really, even the inspiration for why I founded Intravia was the dignity of work and how we are meant to cooperate in work. And there's a salvific nature of working. It's a dignified thing. We are allowed the opportunity to participate participate in our own salvation that way. And so that's why I started here, was to lift up the concept of work, to lift up what it means to work, especially at small businesses in the United States. A lot of the folks that work there are low to middle income Americans, and the differences of points of their healthcare renewal might be the differences of them being able to afford to go to the doctor. And so we can really recognize the individuality and the dignity of the individual by allowing them more dignified work. And that's part of what is the main reason I even decided to do this.
Yeah, I love that. I really appreciate that you have a faith foundation and you can represent Catholics. Of course, there's so many different faiths. We just had a Hindu on the show recently. We had a Catholic today with you, which is fantastic. My grandparents are devout Catholics as well. And they just recently learned about Zoom Mass. And it's so funny. I'll tell you a quick story. My grandmother was saying, yeah, David, I heard that we could load up a program on our TV. I said, Grandma, what do you mean? And they said, oh yeah, our mass is on YouTube. I said, oh, you mean you want to live stream the mass? And like, yes, of course. So of course we pull up the mass on YouTube on their smart TV, and sure enough, we see my aunt, aka their daughter, on screen, and they were just so joyful and so happy to be able to see that. So that's one of the benefits today, is that we get to practice our faith. And especially as leaders in business, as leaders in technology, we can showcase those faith-based values internally and externally with partners, teams, customers. So I'm curious, tell us a little bit more about the business and really the meat of the business, understanding what is that key customer that you're serving today, and also what value do you provide in terms of results, and how do you get those results for your customers?
Yeah, so we're within the PEO industry, professional employment organizations, which is like HR outsourcing, employee benefits, primarily for small businesses. And when we started Intravia, our idea was basically saying that, like, hey, this is a really valuable service. It's actually a $414 billion industry in the United States. But our thesis was that the shopping process was stuck in the 90s, from PDFs, Excel documents, et cetera. And so because this is like a trigger-based buying and selling process, the old go-to-market motions weren't really serving the needs of the small businesses. So at the first point, we were deploying our technology as a marketplace. We were basically showing small businesses that there was a better way to be able to do the shopping, and we were matching them with the vendors and getting paid. So it was free to the small business. The pivot that happened is more that we actually started partnering, a la that big tent idea, with our competition, with health insurance brokers, with PEO brokers, with these vendors themselves, and getting to the small businesses by not competing with those folks, but actually partnering with them. So our direct point of contact is like a insurance broker. Maybe they work with employee benefits or workers' compensation insurance, or a financial advisor, or a fractional CFO, or something like that. Someone who's really that advisor to the small business, that's going to be walking with them as they walk through really important discussions and decisions on human resources, employee benefits, insurances, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I like that. So with over 10 years of experience inside companies like ADP and TriNet, what's the specific moment that you realized that, you know what, PEO buying is actually, that process is fundamentally broken?
I realized it because I was VP of revenue for a smaller company called Procare
Right.
HR. They're backed by Silver Lake. And I actually got to sit on the executive leadership team. And I've seen these like bits and pieces, but I think what clicked was just how hard it is for everybody. I've seen in my career, because I was leading sales teams into the small business realm and hearing them complain and seeing how much they were struggling with this really necessary but annoying thing that they had to do. And then sitting on the other side of the fence and seeing why that was the case, and how nobody's wanting to make somebody's life more miserable. I think that's where it really clicked. Brett Landrum is founder and co-CEO of Procare HR. He's like a mentor to me, and seeing an example of an entrepreneur that wasn't too much further down the path in age than me was, I think, where it clicked, that like I can not just identify that there's a problem and maybe complain about it at happy hour, but I can actually do something about it. And that's what really started clicking in my mind of, oh, I actually can go solve this. I can go solve something and get paid for the value that I bring to other people, which is the amount I help them. And so that's where everything started kind of firing off in my head, and I think was the first domino on my entrepreneurial journey.
Nice. I love it. I actually sent a Domino's gift this morning to the group chat internally. It's so funny. So you're building in an industry typically known for misaligned incentives and opaqueness, forwardness, right? So how does your faith inform decisions that you make about business ethics and how you treat partners?
I think it's all about informed consent and informed choice. We really don't exist to make decisions for anybody, whether it's our broker partners, the vendors on the other side of the platform called PEOs, or the small businesses. We are here to enable the free, quick, and accurate flow of information and data so that everybody can make informed consent and decisions. We're not here to potentially really de-risk anything as far as like telling you what to do. That gets it more into the professional services realm. But I think from a faith perspective is like, we believe that your yes should be yes, and that you should, just going back to the marriage idea, that you should be really fully aware of what you're doing. You shouldn't be going into that decision coerced, and you should really understand what it is that you're trying to say yes or no to, and the implications positively and negatively of that. So that's what that idea is, how we interact with everybody. That goes into our product roadmap of making sure that everybody's really well aware of what's transpiring, what's happening with the data that they're providing into the platform, and also the implications of the decisions that they're making, so that that's not opaque anymore, so that they can really come into it eyes wide open. I'm not saying, you're just like the sunscreen speech from the 90s, your choices are half chance, so are everybody else's. That doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to make sure that they make the right decision, because if anybody could say that I'm going to make you make the right decision, we'd have a lot more lottery millionaires. So people still have that dynamic where we're inherently not predictable. There is still risk to the future. That's how it is. But we're at least allowing you to understand way more clearly, like why, what, and how, when we're going through these discussions with all three stakeholders that interact with Intravia's platform.
Yeah, I love that. I love that perspective, especially in an industry that hasn't always been forthcoming. And you had me add data and data speed. And what I'm really hearing you say, Kasey, is conviction. Are your yeses yes, and are your no's no's? And can you say that not just to be a people pleaser, but with a real belief system that's driven from an authentic, divine place of conviction? So important. So in that conviction realm, some entrepreneurs and some founders and investors as well have this conflict, right, between being faith-based but also driving speed as well. So how do you manage being fast but also being principled, and how do you hold both of those as a founder and communicate that and find investors that are also aligned with that system of values?
I'll be a little bit snarky in my response, but
Good.
I believe in a God that created heaven and earth in 6 days and then rested. And so I don't think that there is a conflict between being faith-based and being quick. I think the more you are aligned with, using your words, the divine, the more I'm aligned in my faith to Father, Son, Holy Spirit, that's actually when things happen a lot faster. The caveat here is that they don't ever happen the way I think. I never would have expected any number of these things that occurred when I started my work day in prayer. And I legitimately just sought to serve other people and to do the will of God instead of what serves my own ego. Again, it's really hard, because I think our natural inclination is to do something that serves the ego, that serves the self, and to put ourselves in the place of God. And in reality, that's what usually slows things down. That's what creates your own stumbling blocks. When that is fully aligned, it is like hitting the straightaway on the Autobahn. Things happen really, really fast. I think just you're just not expecting the how. Which is I think for me so far in my short entrepreneurial journey, that's the sign that I'm doing something right. When people serendipitously pop into the picture, when things just kind of happen out of the blue, that's when I know that's the alignment.
Yeah, I love that. My snarky response would be, what, God rested? You mean God had to rest himself, herself, themselves? Yeah, no, God rested. And that kind of proved the point that it's like, yeah, rest is important. And that's why the Sabbath is so important. I really appreciate also that you mentioned the Holy Spirit as well, and Jesus and God being good core theological belief. Some faith practices would disagree with your theology. Others would say, yeah, you're spot on. So whether you believe or you don't believe, it's that internal conviction that's so important. So I just wanted to take a quick moment to shout out to the Revening team behind the scenes and the production team. If you've considered going live on LinkedIn Live, did you know that LinkedIn has a live stream platform just like YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok? Well, guess what? If you've been thinking about your content journey and you want to have a live conversation with your audience, I'd encourage you to go live on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a professional network of businesses and consumers that are looking for career transitions and business deals. So if you're an investor looking for more businesses to invest in, or an angel wanting to make your first check, I'd recommend you go live on LinkedIn. Even if there's just one person that you connect with, a live conversation will always beat AI. And in fact, in person is even better. So if you're considering LinkedIn, just reach out to us. We'd love to have you either on the show or have a conversation about how we can help you with your live stream strategy. And here's a perfect example. We have a comment asking, the more aligned we are to the divine, the more awesome things happen. And in addition to that, they said, can a leader lead without faith-based foundation to be successful at leading their team? I'm curious, Kasey, what do you think about this question? What a great question.
I think it's a really good question, and I will say, I think the answer is yes, because at the end of the day, you could be successful. I don't think that you'll be as successful. I think it's going to be harder. I think you won't find as much fulfillment in it. But at the end of the day, success, like at least how I understand the world and I understand faith and theology, like if God is all knowing and all encompassing, he doesn't need us in any capacity. Like our yes does not impact him. Our no's do not impact him. He is still perfect. And so can a leader without faith-based foundation be successful at leading their team? 100% yes. And it's because one way, if you didn't have faith or you do have faith, I think the faith base is realizing that you're not the one doing it. I think where the faithless leader thinks that they're the ones doing it, typically, not all the time, but typically, or they put too much pressure on themselves because they think they have to do it. There isn't another outlet there. They are in 100% control. They're in 100% responsibility for everything. And I think that's where it's like, the answer is yes. A lot of the largest unicorn startups in the world were driven by very proud atheists.
Yeah, I love that. That reminds me, actually, I volunteer for a nonprofit called AI and Faith, and we have agnostics and atheists there. Why? Because they also have a moral and ethical compass. So if you're considering AI and faith, we'd love to have you join, especially if you're in the Eastern faith like Buddhism or Taoism, as we are underrepresented in some of those faiths, or any faith that's a greater than a top 10 faith. We have a lot of representation in the top 5, 10 faiths. But yeah, you're exactly right. I really appreciate that response because the short answer is yes, absolutely. Without faith, you can still make ethical and moral decisions. What a great point, Kasey.
Yeah, thank you. The hard thing is it just it devolves really quickly into um, a lack of like understanding, because it's like if you don't have a north star of what that there is objective truth and that there is objective morality, acting more morally is very difficult, because we get into this I'm okay, you're okay perspective, and that's not necessarily saying that's contradicting the individual's dignity and respecting somebody's ability to choose. But what I am saying is, like, it really devolves into the Tower of Babel, because you don't have the understanding that there is objective good and wrong, good and evil. And if you don't have that, then my understanding of what good and evil is, or right and wrong is, shouldn't impose on anybody else's. And that's where we all fall into chaos, because we are lacking that structure and order. And so I think while I'm very adamant that my faith is correct. At the same time, I think the thing that we can do to come together, especially in this time of polarization, is to acknowledge the places where we do see that this is objectively right or this is objectively wrong. And even it doesn't matter how far down we need to go to find those common denominators, but that's where we can start building community and rebuilding, I think, a sense of community, a sense of country, a sense of belonging.
Sense of belonging is incredibly important. And I like that aspect that you keep going back to, which is these biblical stories. And when behind the scenes in the green room, we were basically talking about, oh yeah, Kasey, it's kind of been difficult for us to get connected. I'm not sure why that is, but I know that you're going to just be a star on the show. And you're proving me right, which I love when people prove my assumptions right. I also love when people prove me wrong too, to be honest, because then I get to think and I'm challenged. Yeah, so many good sound bites. I'm excited for our third topic category.
Let's talk about quantum and the future of technology.
All right, this is a big one. Spirituality, technology, AI, ML, emerging technology. Wow, what a mouthful, but it's all tech related. It's all future. What does this mean to you? I'm excited to get into the details, especially since we both have a background in data.
Yeah, I think future technology is at best, again, increasing the dignity of the human person. I'll go back and tell a really classic story to, I think, frame the decisions that we as people, we as a society and as an economy are facing now and need to continue addressing. Go back to even the advent of the automobile. Well, first of all, but prior to that, when we were walking or horse and buggy or bicycles, a lot of our communities were walkable. There were little pockets, even in big cities, there were little small pockets with a corner store and a restaurant, etc. And the automobile was invented and promised to connect us better. It also promised to allow us more free time and the ability to do more of what we want to do. Again, that dignity perspective, by making sure that we're not spending as much time in travel. And then we, as a society, as an economy, actually responded to that innovation by moving farther away, and the advent of suburbs and now replacing that same time with a commute. And I think that's a lot of like the decision that we have to make with the future technology, AI, machine learning, all of that is how we're going to use it. If we're going to use this to trample upon people and trample upon their dignity and trample upon what makes us uniquely human and inherently valuable, I think that we're going to have a even worse problem than we did with the disconnect that we are dealing with right now. And I think if we can align on, going back to the prior segment, ethics, morality, right and wrong, and we can use this to serve people, we're going to see like a boom of flourishing, likely the world has never seen. Case in point, if you think of even the most primitive technology, I'm staring at a brick fireplace right now. A brick can break a window and start a robbery. A brick can be the first thing of starting a homeless shelter. The technology, in this case, the brick, isn't really inherently good or evil. It is just a tool. And so while these advanced machine learning, AI, all of that stuff, models are really interesting, and we can be really tempted to humanize them. They are simply tools. They're simply technology, and when you strip it away, they're zeros and ones on a screen. And so we really need to not be enamored with the wizard behind the screen, for lack of a better term, and make sure that we're really crystal clear on the fact that this is meant to serve people and to alleviate suffering.
Wow, that is so good. I love it. It's essentially the tool, right? It's the bit that says the technology is not the problem, it's the human, right? And from a theological and kind of a framework perspective, I really like Dr. Gretchen Huizinga's paper on righteous AI, including the voice of religion in ethics and technology, where she says, look, we can all agree that divine is the superseding intelligence, divine intelligence, and then you have human intelligence, and then you have machine intelligence. And this was a PhD paper that came out of the University of Washington. And basically, the advisory board that approved this paper and the dissertation was a very diverse board that included an atheist, an agnostic. I think there was a Buddhist, a Hindu, and a Christian, a Jew, and a Catholic. And they all came together and said, oh yeah, we believe in that divine aspect. Okay, so getting into the tech piece or the future aspect, yes, they're not just ones or zeros. They could be both in quantum, as we're finding out, right, with entanglement, superposition. So let's get into the specifics. And I'm not sure if you probably have seen the Gartner's Ascension model for data and engineering, right? You have original software engineering, then you have data engineering, and then you have this machine learning engineering, and have artificial intelligence engineering, and now you have agentic engineering, and you have quantum engineering, right? So when should an organization be considering a strong investment in the machine learning infrastructure? Let's start at the basics. And what is machine learning if someone is just tuning in for the first time?
Yeah, I think the right time to start addressing machine learning for an organization is yesterday, whenever you're listening to this. So I think uh, it, first things first is like machine learning is again like at the very fundamental level. I'm going to oversimplify this. If you like a better dissertation on this, look up the paper that you referenced, David, or get into it online. But it is simply what it sounds like. It's the ability for machines to learn and act upon information, data, inputs, etc. And so, I think it's like saying, I'm not ready for that. I'm not ready for the internet. I'm not ready for email. It's all here though. It's already here. And so I don't think that this is something that the AI or machine learning fairy is going to come along and tap you on the shoulder and say, today is the day that you really should dive into it. I think starting that journey and figuring out what it is and what it means, really being hyper curious, at least you're, again, going back to this, making a informed decision, informed consent on what you are saying yes or no to. When you get into it, it simply is making things go faster. And I think the irresponsible thing can be starting off this X thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars project, not knowing what you're really doing or automating for the sake of automating. If you are automating a horrible process, you're just going to produce more trash. So I think it is really important to have an understanding of what the technology actually is and does, but also not just reading like the latest newsletter or Gemini or Grok or OpenAI or Claude just, release this feature. Now you're going to go spend a week learning about it and implementing it, because it still needs to be aligned to some sort of strategy. It needs, and in this case, where we're talking about funding or business, you need to be actually working toward a goal. And these, again, are tools that help you get to the goal. But if you are thinking that the tools are just the reason in and of themselves on one extreme, or on the other extreme, you're thinking that like, I don't need to worry about this, it's not coming for me, this couldn't help me, or if I implement this, I'm going to be somehow less than or worthless or whatever it is. I think both ends of that spectrum are extreme, and probably the answer is somewhere in the middle.
I love it. There was a software executive that once said, software speeds up process, including bad process, right? So software speeds up process, including bad process. And another technologist who was kind of cited in some circles as like the black Tim Cook or the black Steve Jobs, he would say that all technology, including AI, requires humans in the workflow. And all automation is simply workflow. So I love what you're talking about. And in terms of machine learning and machine intelligence, this idea that, yeah, we need to train our data with machines so that they can be more efficient and faster than us. Not necessarily more intelligent, but more efficient. So I really like that. Okay, so now that we have machine learning, how do we layer on the AI, the prescriptive analytics, right? And the predictive. Now, when I say prescriptive would say, yeah, I prescribe that you will need a prediction, right, is to say I predict that if we take like a weather analogy, I predict that it will be raining today. Now, a prescription would build on top of that and say, okay, if it is going to rain, then you need to put rain boots on. And if you're in Seattle, Washington watching this, you just need a raincoat. But if you're in the Midwest or in the South American jungles, like I've recently been, you definitely need an umbrella, a raincoat, and maybe even to shelter in place. So with that being said, how do people build that predictive and prescriptive layer on top of that machine learning infrastructure?
Great question. So with all of those things, you're assuming that there are patterns to our behavior, and there are.
Potentially.
So that's like the first thing you have to
Right.
start with, is to understand and acknowledge the patterns in what you do, and how the world around you works. Knowing that the patterns aren't always 100% correct, because, to use the example, sometimes the storm goes north, and you wouldn't have known that. Sometimes it is that, yes, it is going to rain, and actually you're training for a marathon and you want to train in the inclement weather so you get used to it. There's always these like edge cases. But first things first is understanding that most of the time the cases aren't the edge cases, and so getting good enough, I think, is really valuable. Well, on the AI piece, on the predictive and prescriptive, that's where it's trying to make sure that you start with your most repetitive tasks. And I think Jesse's chiming in with a really good question of, do you trust the data? Do we trust our incentives? Definitely double check both of those things, but start looking at what you do most often, and start with, is there even a basic decision tree, and can we help make those decision trees go faster? These things are layered on. Think of building out like a prescriptive or predictive model on like a layer cake of, what's the first decision, what's the second decision, and it starts treeing out. If you're going to start with this, start with like a whiteboard of, within our industry, one of the things we're using this technology for is to suggest what vendors a small business's application would be the best fit for. And so that starts by having really good, to Jesse's point, clean data on what the vendors want, and making sure that we have good, clean data on the small business's situation. And then from there, we can start making suggestions. Hey, in the cases that looked like this, most often they see value in X, Y, and Z. Here are the places we think that they should go. Also knowing that there's usually something we don't know, and we are constantly changing. But from there, you can start building on the decision trees of like, all right, well, we know that when this application comes in for our workflows, they need to choose providers to view the data. We also know that you're sitting in Indiana. Most companies in Indiana like talking to these national players, and it may be also these regional vendors that happen to be in Indiana, and then you can continue kind of pulling the thread there. Again, with this automation, it's just automating what people do. So if you can do it
Exactly.
specific enough, you can get there.
Right. Yeah, no, I love that. And it's so interesting that oftentimes people want to complicate tech. I just remember saying, like, what are the 3 steps that you do the most often? Like, let's start there. Like, you get out a sheet of paper, just close your laptop, get a sheet of paper and write it down 1, 2, 3 step. And then we'll go automate just that first step that has the most potential ROI. And let's find simpler ways to do that. And of course, today there's so much in terms of automation. And in fact, my final question before we go into our lightning round, which I'm excited for, is a lot of founders and investors in your industry are either terrified of AI overtaking the industry or overselling it, right? So where do you think the real value is in AI? Where's the real value of AI hiding in HR and compliance workflows?
It's lying in the ability to get closer to human interaction faster. It's not necessarily in automating away what makes us human. It is allowing the solo practitioner, for example, to be able to make human connections with the folks that work at their organization more frequently, for longer, with more information, and faster.
Nice, I like it. Okay, so we're gonna lightning rounds. Producers, just keep us both here on stage. Okay, so you coined the hashtag top 90s GTM in PEO 2K26. What does modern go-to-market actually look like in a space that's been slow to change?
It is getting out of multi-page Excel spreadsheets and PDFs, and at least catching up to the mortgage industry.
I love it. Fun fact aside, the number one data source for Power BI when Power BI was invented was a manual CSV Excel sheet. It was not the cloud. Anyways, all right, lightning round number 2. If Entropi works exactly as you hope over the next 5 years, what does the PEO industry look like differently because of it?
We have accelerated the year-over-year growth from 15% in the industry to 22%, creating well over $200 billion in enterprise value for everybody involved. And we've brought something that takes months in a shopping process and enabled it to be a lot more like car insurance or home and auto, where you're able to at least get matched and get to pricing out of the way so that you can start understanding more about the quality of the relationships instead of the data or the money.
I love it. All right, last one. What's one book, idea, or person that shaped how you think about building companies that serve others rather than just optimizing for returns?
Yeah, I think, well, outside of the Bible, which I think is an obvious thing given what I've said, start with why, Simon Sinek. That is the best way, I think, to start. If you can start with the core, then you'll be able to answer all of those other detailed questions.
I love it. Why by Simon Sinek. Okay, now we're going to go into our favorite segment or our anchor segment, Beyond the Bag. Beyond the bag, beyond the bag, beyond the bag. All right, so I'm excited today. It's always a surprise for me. So, what is in your bag, Kasey?
I carry a rosary with me. It's like a wristband kind of thing, and that is with me no matter what. If I'm going for a business trip or pleasure trip, that's always with me.
Nice. I love it. I have something kind of like that, but what I have is I have this bracelet that actually has a one white symbol representing Christ and then 13 other beads and a cross symbol here that sits on the edge of my bracelet. So it reminded me of that. I've never shared that before. And then secondly, I also have a miniature Jesus Loves You figure, which is just so fun when it's just sitting there hanging out.
Adorable.
And if you don't believe in Jesus, that's okay. My question to you would be, who is God? This is more of a personal thing. Like, is God Buddha? Is God Allah? Is God your Lamborghini? Is God your business? Is it your wife? Is it your kids? What is God to you? And God will reveal himself to you. So, all right, this has been an amazing show, Kasey. I'm so excited to have you. How can people stay in contact with you?
Yeah, the best place to do it is LinkedIn. I don't have other social media, so if you see something that looks like me, tell me because it's not me. So you can see in the show how to spell my name and connect with me there. I post every day and would love to chat with you there too.
Awesome. I love it. And right before we get to our outro video, just remind our audience, who is it that your customers are? What value do you provide? And how do you serve them with measurable results?
Yeah, we work with small businesses, but primarily insurance brokers to help connect small businesses, their clients, to these PEO vendors for outsourced HR, payroll, employee benefits, workers' compensation insurance, et cetera. And we take something that takes weeks and make it take minutes. So if that's something that you're shopping, we have the most efficient platform on earth to do that.
I love it. From weeks to minutes, PEO, vendors, partners, and customers. All right, Kasey, thank you so much for being on the show. If this is your first time, folks, tuning in, please comment, subscribe, like the show, and specifically on Apple Podcasts, go give us a 5-star review if you like this. We loved having Kasey on the show, and we will see you on Thursday with another special guest on The David Daily.